Afternoon, Senator Sampson.
Good afternoon, Madam President. It's delightful to be before this chamber on the final day of the legislative session, carrying out the most important business of the entire session, which is the state budget. For reference, this is House Bill 6689, and it's LCO 10550. Which is a relatively new document. Over the years, Madam President, I've heard the state budget described in many ways. Some have called it a blueprint, even a vision of the party in power's plan for the future. Today, I heard it described as a reflection of our values. And I don't disagree with that. I think that's accurate. It's definitely true that a budget is a symbol of our priorities. And properly crafted, it should have a vision for the future and a plan. I got my first look at this budget document last night, really more of a summary, and I received the actual document around noon today. I mentioned the bill number. I think one of our problems is that our bill numbers have 4 digits. I would much rather serve in a legislature that has bill numbers with a maximum of 2 digits. I think we would do a much better job of representing the public. Our LCO numbers are now up to 5 digits, and these are the numbers that reflect different documents that are crafted in the form of amendments. And it's a lot, Madam President, and I think that's part of our problem, is that our state government has grown far too large and unwieldy. This particular budget is a really short document. It's only 73 pages long. In contrast, we've just voted on a bill to regulate recreational marijuana. That was nearly 300 pages long. And if you compare this budget with the budget from 2019, which I was looking back at my notes, was 572 pages. So I think it's important to discuss the reason why the budget is such a different document this year. And it's really clear. If you take a look at this document, you realize that this document doesn't have very much in the way of policy associated with it. If you look at it, it is nothing more than a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of numbers, but little direction on just how those dollars will be spent. The policy that tells us how that money will be spent is going to come in the form of another document called a budget implementer. And I'll say right here for anyone listening, beware the implementer. That's something that's worth a thoughtful discussion by itself, and we will no doubt debate the document when it comes. But my understanding is that it's not going to come to us until a special session, which I think is unfortunate and a failure of our duty, since we had the entire legislative session to come up with a budget and implement it, and yet we are not going to finish our work on time. That budget implementer has been changed in its implementation and how it's been viewed and used over the last decade that I've been here. And more I see it being used as a catch-all document. Some people might use the term rats to describe legislation that sneaks its way in there that might not have gone through the legislative process. There's a money for a program to train female Democratic candidates for office that I expect to see in that document that's funded in this budget. Savings from closing prisons, extending CBAC benefits to nonpartisan government employees, and a lot more things that I don't think are clear looking at just numbers in a spreadsheet. But my biggest issue with this process and having a budget that doesn't include the implementation language along with it is that it allows the majority party to do things they should not be doing. Reviving dead bills, for example. We have a legislative process where bills come before various committees. They're put up for a public hearing to allow for input from our neighbors, the people we represent, and then they are voted on in committee, and they're supposed to be fine-tuned. And then they come before the House and Senate for votes. Only then should things become law. This implementer that comes is going to contain items that were never heard before. It will contain items that failed to pass both chambers properly. And I believe that's wrong. And I'm going to call attention to it even before it happens. But just moving on, even without the implementer language, from what I can tell, this budget, like previous budgets, appears to be more or less a cobbled together collection of new and old revenue sources. Of course, this time it also includes a veritable mountain of federal money that is going to help fund the revenue side of the budget. I'll point out for the first time, and probably many times throughout my comments, that that is also taxes that each of us have paid to the federal government. And of course, all of this is designed to plug holes left by decades of out-of-control spending and ever-increasing debt, much of which is not addressed in this document. And also to continue the progressive agenda of growing government even further, creating more and more dependence on our state government, and adding more and more burdens on the people that we represent who are working harder and harder to make ends meet. The choice Connecticut must face before long is whether we will continue to operate this way, growing government and its monstrous appetite, or growing our economy and the freedom and wealth that will result from doing so. For me, Madam President, that is the question that really matters when deciding how to vote on a budget. The majority, and sadly some of my Republican colleagues who have voted or will vote for this budget, are going to repeat over and over, not just in the near future, but long into the future, that this is a no-tax budget. And I just want to take a moment to illustrate that that is simply not true. Aside from the actual taxes that can be pointed out in the document itself, for example, there's the corporate surcharge. This is something that is supposed to sunset. This is a tax on corporations in our state that is raising revenue at the expense of their ability to produce, provide jobs, and grow our economy, and yet it's being continued in this document. I consider removing a sunset and continuing a temporary tax to continue a new tax. So that counts as something that I would not ascribe to a no-tax budget. They're also using something called the capital base tax method, which I would describe as a disgusting tax that is based on already obtained wealth. It punishes success and profitable businesses by taxing not just their income, but also their assets that they've accrued over time. There is the extension of the property tax credit sunset. Folks listening probably remember filling out their income taxes and being able to deduct $500 from the amount that they paid for their property tax on their home and cars, which was then reduced to $300, and then I think $200, and then eliminated altogether except for a few Connecticut residents. And year after year and budget after budget, we're promised that it's going to be restored, and yet here we are again, and that is continued. Again, a tax that exists on Connecticut residents. There are also plenty of taxes that are being voted on outside of this budget, and purposely, Madam President, because everyone knows that had those taxes been contained in this budget document itself, it would have put its passage in jeopardy. And we want to make sure that we get as many Democratic and potentially Republican votes as possible, I guess. But make no mistake, this budget and the expansive government that continues to be built relies on the revenues from those taxes. We have new taxes on gaming. I'm pretty certain this budget relies on revenue from there. And while maybe not explicitly, and I can't seem to figure out how one thing equals another because I only have this spreadsheet and no policy language, there are going to be taxes on the new regulation of marijuana, presumably, if it passes. Yesterday, the highway or mileage tax, whatever you want to call it, passed separately last night in both chambers. There will be revenue generated from that also. and it will be used to grow our government and fund the items contained in this budget. And not only these things, there are also lots of small things. There's a tax on using credit cards to pay government fees, which is possibly, Madam President, one of the most obnoxious things you can do, in my opinion, since the fees are already taxes. So we're going to charge our constituents, the people we are charged with representing, fees or taxes for their interactions with our state government. And when they pay by credit card, we're going to charge them another fee for doing so. So I repeat, saying that this budget has, quote unquote, no taxes is simply not true. And it's obvious because the money that is being spent in this budget document can only come from one place: taxes. That's the only place that money comes from in a state budget. And that's because the government does not produce anything. It does not produce wealth or profits. It can only spend wealth that is produced by people in the private sector. And when looking at any budget, Madam President, the most important information is contained in the bottom line spending numbers. People can argue over what's a tax or a fee or whether it's included or not, but if you really want to know whether taxes are going up, you should be looking at what the spending number is, because it's all taxes. And when the spending number goes up, the amount of taxes you're being charged is going up also. And this budget, Madam President, spends way more than ever before in our state. Fiscal year 22, the amount appropriated is $22.74 billion. That is a 2.6% increase over fiscal year 21. And in fiscal year 23, it is $23.62 billion. And that's a 3.9% over fiscal year 22. But it's worth noting that that is also a 6.5% increase over fiscal year 21, which is this year. So by the end of this next 2-year cycle, our taxes and spending will have increased 6.5%, more than they are today. That is massive. The idea that this is a good budget, that it's so balanced and so responsible because it has no taxes, is a dishonest argument. 6.5% in 2 years is a massive increase, especially when you consider we have had some of the largest spending and tax increases in the history of our state in the last decade. I believe this is the largest one. And I remember when I got here in 2011, the state budget was $17 billion. And that included nearly $4 billion in federal Medicaid funds that we don't even count towards this number in the budget anymore. Spending, spending, spending. That's what's important. Spending is a reflection of the size and scope of our government and its influence on our lives as individuals. I heard the House had a standing ovation for passing the most, quote-unquote, complicated budget ever passed in Connecticut. I don't want to minimize any individuals or the work that they put into this document, but that is not something we should be proud of, passing the most complicated budget ever. That's not what my constituents want to hear. And after all, how complicated is it to spend like crazy using federal grants of $1.7 billion, plus potentially another stimulus of $200 million, so $2 billion worth of federal grant money that's going to be added to the revenue side of this budget? That doesn't sound very complicated to me. It sounds suspect and way too easy to get away with increasing the size and scope of our government and the spending that goes along with it. And then, incidentally, there are no plans for future revenue sources for replacing that, because everyone knows today, looking at this document, that there are deficits in the out years. In fiscal year 24, the deficit is projected to be $1.12 billion, and in fiscal year 25, $1.16 billion. And yet we're going to vote for a budget knowing that 3 years from now, we're going to be back in this place having another budget deficit. For me, that's just simply wrong. You don't support a budget knowing it's going to lead to future problems because it gets you by just the next 2 years. And I'll point out that I think that those projections about a little over $1 billion in deficits in those 2 years is a complete ridiculous understatement of reality. Those projections are not even close to accurate. But even assuming they are, that means that we are headed towards a giant fiscal cliff. And the people that vote for this budget today are going to be supporting a budget that they know results in the fiscal crisis, or at very least a reason or excuse to have more tax hikes placed upon the people they represent. I'll point out that had we not received this $2 billion in federal help, again, all taxes that we paid to the federal government, this budget would have been the largest tax hike in the history of our state. As it is, it's the most spending and creates the largest state government that this state will have ever had. I chose to be a Republican because I believe in less government and less burdens on taxpayers. And this is the opposite. And let us ask ourselves, Madam President, do the people of Connecticut actually benefit from this budget? Will businesses in our state see this budget as a change in direction that makes Connecticut more attractive? I don't think so. How about millennials? The first reaction I have when I look at this is the mountains of debt that are going to be piled on young people who stay in our state. Why would they want to stay here and end up inheriting all of this debt and the taxes that will inevitably come with it? Then I think, what about jobs? I don't think there's going to be more business opportunities as a result of this massive increase in spending and the continuation of the corporate surcharge and so forth. I recognize that we have an influx of folks moving to Connecticut, but they are fleeing other states that have high taxes and irresponsible budgeting. But what about everyone else, particularly seniors and the many, many other people that I talk to who are still considering leaving Connecticut? Clearly, this is a problem. And we cannot sustain the monstrous appetite of this government without people here who are going to work and pay taxes. Will the policies contained in this budget be enough to cause anyone to reconsider moving away from Connecticut? I don't think so, Madam President. The question really is, what is wrong with Connecticut? What is the state? What is wrong with the state? What is our problem? Why do we have a deficit? Why are residents contemplating and actually moving to other states, mostly southern states, red states with lower tax burdens, while we are simultaneously gaining illegal immigration, illegal immigrants, and also jobs that go to low-wage workers? Why is Connecticut still known, despite the fact that I've been here for 10 years hearing how we are going to fix this problem, we are still known to be notoriously hostile to businesses? There are loads of reasons. And we could talk quite a while about all of the individual policy decisions and votes that got us here. And we can revisit many of the debates that took place in this circle just in the last several weeks to identify many of those reasons. This budget is just more of the same, bringing us down the same tired path and likely to result in more and more huge deficits to be addressed with more taxes. But it's not that hard to figure out the answers, Mr. President. If I had to pick one phrase to boil it down, I would simply say, we are not competitive. If you ask your constituents what's wrong, they'll tell you it's not a secret Everybody knows it's too expensive to live here. There's too many taxes, energy costs too much. And many of our friends and neighbors are asking themselves over and over, year after year, is it going to get any better? How much longer can they afford to stay in Connecticut? Businesses say it's too expensive. We hear it every day. That's not a secret either. So why does this budget make it even harder to do business in Connecticut? I know business owners that were looking forward to the sunset of the corporate tax surcharge. I have even had, Mr. President, business owners in the state walk up to me and tell me they fear us. They fear the people in this building and the people downstairs in the House. And who can blame them when they have to be concerned about the next thing we are going to do to them? College graduates, why would they stay here? They have the same problems. They know it's too expensive to stay here. No matter who you are and how much you love this state, and I do love this state, which is why I'm standing here before you, Mr. President, I make the same commitment every 2 years. I am going to stay and fight. That's why I keep running for office. That's why I keep standing up and saying these things over and over again. But you cannot help but recognize that we are not competitive. We are losing our edge, and we will continue to until we change direction. If the problem is that it's too expensive to be here, and there are just too many taxes and regulations, then the answer must be to work on those problems. How do we do that? Again, it's simple. You can just ask anyone, and they will tell you. We need to make it clear that we intend to make it so that you are not better off in Texas, so that you would not be better off in South Carolina or Florida or even Massachusetts. Whether you are a single person or a growing family, a retiree, or a small business or a huge corporation, we need to let every one of those folks know that we want to make Connecticut more competitive and that staying in Connecticut will be a smart decision. But every 2 years, there's another budget that looks like this. And it's sad, Mr. President, because every one of us in this circle understands exactly what I'm saying and that that's exactly what the problems are, and they also know how to fix them. It only requires the will to do so. We need to address our long-term obligations. And yes, that means reining in public sector employee unions and the pension debt that is threatening the financial future of Connecticut. This is not the direction that my constituents are asking for. More than anything, people will tell you, we just need to cut spending and taxes. But as I have pointed out, Mr. President, that is not what this budget does. It does the exact opposite. This budget taxes and spends more than $1 billion more the first year and more than $2 billion more in the second year. The moment I heard that, I was an automatic no vote. Just for comparison's sake, compare it with the 2019 budget, which was also awful and filled with a mountain of new spending and taxes. That budget raised spending nearly $1 billion more each year. A huge increase, to be sure, but not even half of what this budget proposes to do. I hope my Republican colleagues are listening, because I want to say it's awful odd that it was enough for Republicans to vote no in 2019, and yet we're doubling the increase in spending this time, and many of my Republican colleagues in the House thought this budget was worth voting for. I hope that is not the case in the Senate today. My opinion, Mr. President, is that the state spent and taxed too much on the day I was first elected back in 2010. Coincidentally, the same day Governor Malloy was elected. And I have watched and voted no on every budget since then, with one exception, and that was the Republican budget that passed in 2017 that we worked very hard on, that legitimately raised no taxes and cut no funding for education. And no, it wasn't a perfect document either. But compared to the one that ultimately passed after Governor Malloy vetoed it, it was a tremendous start down the right path. And I often reflect and ask myself how much better off we would be if we were living under that budget or one like it today. But sadly, every budget passed into law since 2011, since I got here, has raised spending and taxes substantially. They were also all out of balance on the day that they were passed. And they all had projected deficits in the third year. I've heard some of my colleagues today say that there are, quote unquote, policy reasons for these huge new spending figures. Now, what's the reason? We need even more government? To me, it's just proof of mismanagement. The only way forward for our state's economic future is growth. It's the only way to create jobs and opportunities, encourage businesses and people to choose Connecticut. It's also the only way we are going to pay off our long-term debts and obligations. And that growth is only going to come with public policy that makes our state more attractive as a place to live, work, and retire. That means reducing spending and cutting taxes, reducing regulations, lowering the cost of living, the exact opposite of what has been done and the exact opposite of what is contained in this document. For me, Madam President, I don't believe that there is more than one way to fix these problems. There's only one way. It's the ways I've just described. Making Connecticut more attractive by reducing the burden on the citizens and businesses that are here. And every day that we choose not to do those things, the situation will continue to worsen. I mentioned 2017. What ultimately happened after that Republican budget was vetoed by the governor was that we passed something called the compromise budget. I didn't vote for that budget, and I don't really want to get down on my friends who did. I couldn't vote for it, but I understand why they did. Times seemed desperate. The governor was threatening massive cuts to education and town aid, and it was an opportunity to actually pass some Republican items by giving them, the majority, some votes, things that would not have been included without our support. But like all budgets, it did good things and bad things. The good things were really good. A spending cap, a bonding cap, a requirement to vote on contracts. Those good things, particularly the spending cap, are sadly and cleverly being circumvented in the budget before us. I was going to talk at length about it, but I'll just say a few words about the notion of shifting. Shifting, to me, is a way to describe what's happening when you make a promise that you're only going to spend a certain amount of money in your state budget, and then when you want to spend more than that, you take certain items and you say, well, this is not included in the budget. We're going to spend that money, of course, but it's not in the budget. It's an off-budget expenditure. And we saw it all through the Malloy years when he took Medicaid right out of the budget for the purpose of keeping our spending number so it could be described as being beneath the spending cap. But in this budget, there are more things. Putting off payments that are supposed to get us on government or GAAP accounting. I forget what the GAAP stands for, government something accounting principles. At any rate, those payments are going to be put off because if they were included, even 1 year's payment would put us over the spending cap at $85 million. That's how close we are. That's not the only example either, Madam President. There are a number of ways this budget circumvents the spending cap by moving things off budget. And the bad things that were contained in that compromise budget in 2017 continue to haunt us. Not just the significant increases in spending despite a struggling economy, a familiar situation that we desperately need to reverse, but we're still paying the $500 million bailout of the city of Hartford. We still have that elimination of the property tax credit on our income tax. We had talked about offering an amendment on it, and hopefully we'll be able to draft something before this debate is over, because I believe that's something that we should draw attention to and remind our constituents that some of us are working for them, and we want to keep the promise that that temporary reduction in that tax credit was indeed temporary and it should be restored today. I'm getting to the end of my remarks, Madam President, but I want to tell people that I do have it in me to compromise. A lot of what we say on this floor only comes when you have the desire and passion to get up and speak on something, but I work on a lot of bills and legislation behind the scenes very well with my colleagues in both parties to make good things happen for this state. And not everything we do here is bad, though. It is mostly when I think things are going the wrong way that I'm inclined to get up and talk about it. All of our constituents want us to work together. But I also don't think that means that they want me to simply vote for bad policies. I'm always willing to listen and find common ground. But what I won't bend on are the principles that I believe in, or my responsibility or my oath to the people that I represent. And I appreciate the desire to find common ground. But I think my colleagues that are finding common ground in this document are going too far. There's no viable compromise in this document that's before us. Compromising in this way, for me, means moving away from the only correct solution. I wish I had taken the time over the years to write down some of the comments that were made in favor of the previous budgets passed over the last decade. Which one of these budgets was the one that was going to solve all our problems? Is it going to be this one? No, it's not. This budget will not be the one that solves our problems. We will be back here in no time addressing the same issues and more deficits and passing more Band-Aids, trying to keep businesses in our state, offering corporate welfare. We did one earlier this year for data centers. What we need to fix this mess and move our state forward is much harder than this. Sadly, our ability to actually pass any kind of responsible budget was dramatically reduced when the labor deal passed in 2017 that locked us into expenses that are very hard to meet. This budget is in direct contradiction to the message we need to send as a signal to businesses and citizens that Connecticut has a bright future. I have said here several times that every bill needs to be measured against whether it makes us more attractive and competitive as a state. And if not, the answer should be a no vote. Funding our state on future tax hikes, federal grants, we could not do this without, and new sin taxes is not worthy of a vote from me. It's also in direct contradiction to my beliefs as a Republican and as an American. This budget just feeds the monster that has become our state government, and I cannot vote for it. Thank you, Madam President.
Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. This is House Bill 6689. House Bill 6689. Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate on House Bill 6689. Immediate roll call vote in the Senate on House Bill 6689. Immediate roll call vote in the Senate. House Bill 6689. Immediate roll call vote in the Senate. Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. House Bill 6689. Immediate roll call vote in the Senate on House Bill 6689. Immediate roll call vote in the Senate. House Bill 6689. Immediate roll call vote in the Senate.
Have all the senators voted? Have all the senators voted? Ladies and gentlemen, just admire this bipartisan board for a moment. Let us take it all in because I will lock the vote now and ask Mr. Clerk to please announce this very impressive tally.
House Bill 6689. Total number voting 35. Total number voting yea 31. Total voting nay 4. Absent. Not voting 1.
Congratulations, we have a budget that has passed.